Welcome to another Counselor Soapbox video. This episode, Learning About Alcohol Part 20, covers the second part of Treatment Individual Counseling. Individual counseling sessions are much less common in substance abuse counseling than they are in mental health. The dominant model in substance use disorder counseling is group therapy. There are lots of possible styles and theories, but one that is a fundamental skill for beginning counselors is to be a good listener. We often call this Rogerian style counseling. Early in the process, you're looking for areas of the client's life that have been affected by substance use. And drug and alcohol counselors tend to make more self-disclosure than in many other fields. It's important for the beginning counselor to make sure that that self-disclosure is appropriate. In individual counseling, you may be giving the client some feedback. It has to be done in an empathetic way, but it's important to do some things like reality testing, telling the clients what is and is not factual, and to point out discrepancies between what they say and what they do, what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and so on. This gives the client the opportunity to try to develop a more realistic style of thinking and to get clear on their own thinking, feeling, and behaving. A lot of drug counseling involves education. There's education about drugs, there's education about recovery, and also education about what to expect of the process of recovering from drugs and alcohol, and then living life with all of its recurring problems and challenges while clean and sober. Effective counseling is all about the therapeutic relationship, the connection between the client and the counselor. One way of looking at this is that the counselor is a guide to recovery land. Clients are typically familiar with the world of drug and alcohol use, but may have difficulty in navigating all of the things that are different as they move into recovery. It's important to maintain a position of unconditional positive regard. That doesn't mean you approve of everything that the client has done or is doing, but it means that no matter what they've done, you believe in their ability to change and that they have a worthwhile value as a person. Remember, the client has to do the work. While we can be guides to their journey, they are the ones who have to take their journey through the process of moving to recovery land. There's several missteps that a drug and alcohol counselor may make. One is to get involved in trying to decide whether the client is lying or telling the truth. Drug and alcohol clients frequently have told themselves stories so often that they have deceived themselves. They've also used dishonesty as a way to get their needs met. The same thing is true of manipulation. It's easy to call clients in a treatment program manipulative, but this is a characteristic they've learned in order to get their needs met in the past. What we want to do is teach them new ways of behaving, and getting caught up in a negative view of clients impairs the counselor's effectiveness. Also, it's important to notice that the primary relationship in a client's life is often their drug of choice. They may experience a significant grief and loss because this chemical, which has been their major relationship, is no longer a part of their life. That devotion to the drug of choice may also have caused difficulties in other relationships which now need to be repaired. Evidence-based practices are commonly used in drug and alcohol treatment. There is a national registry of evidence-based principles and practices. It's important to know that not all evidence-based practices are equal. Some are the result of large numbers of studies and studies on specific populations. Others have only been used once or twice and only with one small population. The better approaches are typically manualized approaches. The program and the counselor work from a manual, going through lessons one at a time. It's important for the counselor to stay faithful to that model. It's easy to bring in materials from other models and things the counselor may have learned, but adding too much to the treatment model can result in important things being left out. The counselors need training ongoing in whatever model they are being used. It's important to draw a distinction between supervision and consultation. Supervision at the site is about the counselor, and it should include therapeutic issues, teaching the beginning counselor how to be more effective working with the client. Consultation is something that the counselor goes to a supervisor or an outside person, such as a psychiatrist or medical doctor, with specific questions about an individual client and their issues. Group counseling is the dominant modality for drug and alcohol counseling. This grew out of the 12-step movement. Treatment in mental health settings was originally done by doctors and later on therapists, and has the individual session as its model. But because drug and alcohol counseling grew out of self-help groups, the group setting is the dominant way of its delivery. We need to know that therapy or process groups talk about the individual issues and how the clients are applying principles they're learning to their lives. Groups can also involve a corrective emotional experience. They can experience things in this group they may not have experienced in their lives in the past. Treatment programs are also a laboratory in which clients learn new skills and then practice those skills so that when they leave the program, those use of those new skills will be automatic. There are two principal types of groups, although there are many other subtypes. Open groups are groups in which the composition is constantly changing. Every time group meets, a new person may enter. Closed groups are those kinds of groups which will be together from the very first session all the way to the end. They develop more of a cohesion, but it's not possible to introduce new people into a closed group partway through the sessions. The content of groups can vary a great deal. There are many types of content that are delivered in the group setting. One is psychoeducation, psychological education about cravings or relapse or feelings might be delivered in that format. There are support groups in which people are encouraged to talk about their day-to-day issues and what's going on. Feelings groups can help people explore what it is they're feeling and how to manage feelings. Feelings can be a major source of relapse. There are also problem-solving groups that might focus on a particular issue, finances, getting a job, relationships, and so on. Relapse prevention, of course, is a major part of group curriculum for drug and alcohol programs. There can also be activity groups. Many clients have never had the experience of having fun without drugs, alcohol, or sex being the principal activity. Having an activity where people participate in something that's fun, clean, and sober may be the first time they've ever had that experience. Of course, lots of life skills can be the focus of groups, jobs, money, and so on. And it's common in drug and alcohol programs to do what's called 12-step facilitation. That is, the group teaches the clients the 12 steps and possibly also the 12 traditions of AA and NA. There are certain basic counselor skills that are needed to be good at running group. Beginning counselors need to be taught these and then need to practice them. One is scanning, looking around the room. It's important that group does not turn into a series of individual sessions with individual clients. Some programs do check-in at the beginning of group where we go around and talk to each individual person. But while each person is checking in, it's important for the counselor to be scanning the room, seeing who is anxious to make a contribution and who may not be anxious. Also, if someone looks like they're withdrawn or having difficulty. Part of the skills needed is learning to restrain oversharers. Some people become very enthusiastic and want to say a great deal. And it's common for counselors to need to say, thank you for your contribution. Now I want to hear from someone who hasn't had a chance to talk yet. We also need to, as group leaders, encourage less active people. Some people will sit back letting others talk and never get to their own issues. So when the counselor sees that person not being active in sharing, ask them for a participation. Sometimes there's a number of people all raising their hands or wanting to talk at once. There's a thing called stacking or traffic control, which the counselor keeps track of who all has wanted to talk and says, okay, person number 1 will go, then person number 2, then person number 3. It's important for the counselor to learn a skill called selective attention. The things you attend to, you will get more of. So when a client talks about having a difficult time and then not drinking, rather than focusing on how hard it was to not drink, the counselor would focus on their success, that despite their urges to drink, they did not do so. Drug and alcohol counselors are often asked to work with the families of those who are in treatment. It's important for them to stay within their scope of practice and talk about how drugs and alcohol has affected the family rather than trying to do marriage or family counseling. One of the things that the counselor will be doing is educating the family about addiction and about the journey to recovery land, how so many things in their lives may need to change. Some couples may need couples therapy. The drug and alcohol counselor has to limit that to how the substance has altered their relationship. If more extensive couples therapy or family therapy is needed, that should be referred out. Some programs have licensed therapists available who can help with couples, family, and children's therapy. Children often have been developed difficulties because of one of the adults or both drug and alcohol problems, and they may need their own specific therapy. One very effective format that's been used is the multi-family group therapy. That is when all the families who are in the program get together on a particular night of the week, or when maybe once a month at an alumni meeting, all of the families get together. And they're able to share about how they're progressing in recovery and how recovery has changed their family. Many programs have alumni groups, and some have auxiliary groups for the families or spouses of the people who are in treatment. One important thing to be aware of is what we call the domestic violence exclusion. If a family has had a history of domestic violence, it's important not to start working on individual issues between the two of them. They can come to a counseling session, talk about their conflicts, and then go home and domestic violence reoccurs. If domestic violence could be occurring, it's important that that be treated before attempting to do anything about the other issues. And so often families may be referred out for domestic violence treatment. In the course of their training, drug and alcohol counselors learn a great deal about families and how they function. Still, it's important that substance abuse counselors stick to the effects of drugs and alcohol, addiction and recovery, and not try to move over into becoming family counselors unless they are also trained as family or therapists. For the trained counselor, one of the things we find is important is not to take sides with one person or the other. Help them learn the skills to work things out. And communication is about feelings, not necessarily about being right. Addiction affects the family in many ways, and the problems they're faced with once the person with the substance use disorder gets into recovery are wide and varied. They can include family issues, there may have been affairs, and there is a need to be heard and validated, particularly from the family member who didn't use the addiction to manage their feelings. Many couples in which there is addiction, there's been past trauma on one or both family members, and they need to heal from those traumas. Just because the drinking or drug use stops, the problems do not automatically go away. In fact, without the substances, some of these other issues surface as being very important. One other caution, there's a tendency to fall into the new loved object trap. Someone in early recovery believes that most of their problems were because their partner was not supportive enough or didn't make them happy. There's a tendency to think, if I fall in love with someone else, then I will be happy. Part of recovery may include separation and even divorce. Sometimes the bad things that have happened in a relationship have hurt one or both people so deeply that even though the substance abuser stops using, they can't undo all of that pain, and the couple may end up breaking up or separating. Attendance at self-help groups is often combined with a formal treatment program. There are a great many self-help groups, and they all have their own background and understanding of things. The first and oldest is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. They have many meetings all over the world. Narcotics Anonymous is also a large and flourishing self-help group. There are probably 200 to 300 other 12-step groups and some non-12-step groups. So, Al-Anon is a group, an offshoot of the original AA, which is designed for the family members who were not themselves the addict or alcoholic. There's also an Alateen and Alatot. And there are dual diagnosis groups for those people who have both a substance use disorder and a mental health problem. There are some mental health self-help groups, and there are a large number of faith-based religious groups that may incorporate either the 12 steps or some kind of faith-based recovery support for people in early recovery. There are a number of therapies that are used in substance abuse treatment. One of the early types was aversion therapy, the idea of punishing people every time they tried to use a drug or alcohol. Those have pretty well fallen out of use as they are not terribly effective. 12-step facilitation is common. That is, while the program doesn't do the steps, 12-step is a self-help group, they do teach the steps. Behavioral skills are important, and they can be based on either learning theory, learning new behaviors and new management techniques, and social skills. There's a system called motivational enhancement, in which attention is paid to any positive things in supporting whatever the client's goals are for treatment. Medical treatment can be used. There are replacement drugs for some things. Patches for nicotine, for smoking cessation, have been particularly effective. One issue in treatment that needs to be dealt with is relapse prevention. It's important to think of this as a process, not a single event. Often this process begins with cravings, thoughts about using, well before the actual picking up of the drug. Support systems are important. If someone hangs out with people who are using and drinking, then they are likely to have pick up and use and drink with them. Positive, clean, and sober support systems improve the chances that someone will stay abstinent. But we have to emphasize that the thinking about relapse often begins with the thought, And if the client can ride that thought out, it will go away all by itself. Some people confuse willpower and won't power, and I think it's an important distinction. Willpower is making yourself do something unpleasant, such as exercise now, for the future health benefits. Most of the power that's needed in recovery is won't power. It's turning down something that sounds really appealing right at the moment, waiting for that desire to do that, drink that beer or have that drug, and waiting for that craving to go away. Often we talk about relapse triggers: hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. This is physical sensations like being tired, thirsty, hungry, as well as emotional sensations like anger and loneliness can be strong relapse triggers. Another way of looking at that is inside internal triggers and outside external triggers. Programs often spend time talking about unhelpful thoughts, sometimes called dysfunctional thoughts. There's also a lot of emphasis on teaching people the recovery lifestyle, how things will be and need to be different when they are no longer using drugs and alcohol. The field of substance abuse treatment continues to change. There are a number of other approaches besides the traditional 28-day rehab or outpatient program. One of those was therapeutic communities, and there are still some of those about. In therapeutic communities, the program was largely run by the clients, though there were professional employed people working there. And it was common in therapeutic communities for graduates to then be hired to continue to work at that same program. Today, more and more of the people working in programs are not only graduates, but have gone to school to be formally trained as drug and alcohol counselors. We're seeing an increase in new media, online social media sites, apps for smartphones, and so on, some of which can be helpful reminders about practicing the skills needed to stay in recovery. An emerging field is distance counseling. Initially, counselors were concerned, leery of this approach, but we're finding that using new technology, where you can both see and hear the client, it's possible to do effective counseling with people who were not able to come to the office. So web-based services are becoming more common, and more insurance companies are covering those sessions. There are a great many spiritual, faith-based programs also available. It's common now to include some form of meditation or mindfulness. These can be more in the way of thinking and relaxation techniques than necessarily a particular religious or philosophical belief. Teaching people stress reduction can also be helpful. Many programs include activities, clean and sober events, teaching the client how to be happy and how to have fun. There also is emphasis on fitness and well-being. As people become abstinent, they also like to become happier and healthier. Programs now may involve themselves in smoking cessation classes and even on exercise or weight loss programs. What's ahead on the Counselor's Soapbox channel? More learning about drug and alcohol counseling, including a series specifically on the job, duties, and functions of drug counselors, more education about specific drugs, and eventually some mental health and wellness videos. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like button directly below. For more information, please visit the CounselorSoapbox.com blog, where you will find articles on mental health, substance abuse, and having a happy life. The David Joel Miller fiction and nonfiction books are available on Amazon.